critics or independent radio stations or going to see bands live or recommendations from friends.
Yep. Remember the word friction. I think sometimes being an active and engaged listener and lover of music means to embrace friction sometimes. I'm going to just read one final thing. I'm just going to read this as a way of wrapping this up that you write toward the end of your conclusion. To address the root causes of our ailing music culture, we need to have deeper conversations about why music matters, why universal access to music matters, and what systematic political and economic realities currently prevent so many people from engaging deeply with music. It is always worth remembering that our shared music culture would be so much more compelling and diverse if so many did not need to abandon the arts for jobs with health insurance. Amen to that. A good point to end on. Liz Pelly, she's author of The Mood Machine, The Rise of Spotify, and The Cost of the Perfect Playlist. Liz, thanks for the book and thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Anthony Brooks. This is On Point.
Support for AI coverage in On Point comes from MathWorks, creator of MATLAB and Simulink software for technical computing and model-based design. MathWorks, accelerating the pace of discovery in engineering and science. Learn more at mathworks.com. And from Olin College of Engineering, committed to introducing students to the ethical implications of artificial intelligence in engineering through classes like AI and Society. olin.edu.
On Point is a production of WBUR Boston and is distributed by APM, American Public Media.
Support for On Point comes from BetterHelp, committed to helping clients with issues ranging from relationship challenges and goal setting to grief and depression. Learn more at betterhelp.com/public. And Seeds DSO1 is a 24-strain 2-in-1 probiotic and prebiotic engineered to survive digestion, support healthy regularity, and promote whole body health. Learn more at seed.com/public.
KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. It's almost noon, and as usual on a Friday, Week in Review is coming up. Here's your host, Bill Radke.
I'll go you one better. I would say beyond as usual. It's almost like you can just pencil it in, maybe even ink it in. I'm there for you. We're going to discuss Washington State standing up to the president. Is that always a good idea? How did Trump administration moves against visiting college students affect our university's missions? The latest on which budget reductions and tax increases are most likely to happen in Washington State? And should vandalizing a Tesla be a hate crime? And a reason to smile. We always end the show on a smile.
As always,
it's every time.
Bill Radke with Week in Review coming up. 52 degrees in South Seattle, partly sunny this afternoon, high of 55. Chance of showers overnight and tomorrow morning. Saturday expected to wind up mostly sunny. Sunday expected to be mostly sunny as well with a high of 60.
Support for KUOW's car donation program comes from local Kia dealers, offering the Niro Hybrid with driver-centric dual displays, providing touchscreen navigation, entertainment, and vehicle information. More at kia.com.
I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
And I'm Joshua McNichols. We host KUOW's economy podcast, Booming.
We're seeing widespread layoffs, and experts are speculating about whether AI is to blame. On the latest episode of Booming, I asked Microsoft President Brad Smith how to weather the AI revolution.
Listen to Booming on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for KUOW comes from Intiman Theater, presenting Ahamefule J. Oluo's new show, The Things Around Us. Oluo uses looping technology, the trumpet, and other instruments with cardboard boxes for percussion to create a symphony. April 24th to May 4th. More at intiman.org.
Live from NPR News, I'm Lakshmi Singh. The White House is pressuring thousands of migrants deemed to be in the U.S. without legal status to self-deport by revoking their Social Security numbers. That means cutting off people's access to employment, bank accounts, and other basic financial services. The administration confirms its use of a tactic that includes placing the names of living immigrants to Social Security's death master file, which had long been used to ID recipients who should no longer get benefits because they're dead. But critics say the latest enforcement is extreme. They warn U.S. citizens and others legally residing in the U.S. could also be swept up. The administration's already accused of mistakenly deporting a number of people to Central America last month, including a Maryland man the White House admits was deported as a result of an administrative error. White House envoy Steve Witkoff's in Russia for meetings with top Kremlin officials, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. Visit unannounced. President Trump is urging Russia to take steps to make peace in Ukraine. Here's NPR's Charles Maines.
Putin hosted Witkoff on the sidelines of a working trip to Russia's second-largest city of St. Petersburg. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov played down the chances of a breakthrough on the Ukraine issue, but said it was an opportunity for both sides to clarify their positions and discuss a possible future meeting between the two leaders. Putin rejected an earlier Trump-backed ceasefire proposal, instead laying out conditions for peace that critics say amount to Ukraine's de facto capitulation. In turn, Trump has warned he may resort to secondary sanctions on Russian oil exports if he feels Putin is dragging out negotiations while trying to improve Russia's position on the battlefield. Charles Maines, NPR News, Moscow.
A Tennessee bill challenging federal education rights is one step closer to becoming law. It has narrowly passed the state Senate. From member station WPLN, Mariana Bacaya reports the measure would allow schools to deny students who do not have legal status in the U.S.
The bill aims to challenge the 1982 Supreme Court decision that established the right to an education for all students, regardless of immigration status. The bill's Republican sponsors hope for a different outcome this time around, given the court's 6-3 majority of GOP appointees. But not all Republicans support the measure. Several joined Democrats in voting no, like Tennessee Senator Todd Gardenhire.
I believe that we are punishing children for the wrongdoing of their parents.
The bill still has to clear the Tennessee House. For NPR News, I'm Mariana Bacallao in Nashville.
U.S. stocks are trading higher this hour, part of the highs and lows this week in the wake of President Trump's tariffs policy and a trade war with China. Beijing slapping a 125% tariff on American goods after Washington pushed up its levies on Chinese imports to 145%. Dow's up 1.5%. It's NPR.
This is KUOW News. I'm Paige Browning. Health officials have identified a measles case in King County. An adult tested positive for the disease earlier this month. Seattle King County Public Health got notice April 4th and says the person was likely exposed to measles during international travel. It's not connected to any of the previous local measles cases this year. There are 4 statewide this year so far. Police, public health officials, that is, continue to remind people the best protection against measles is the measles vaccine. Governor Bob Ferguson is firing back against the president's latest threat to withhold all federal funding from states with sanctuary cities. Ferguson says in a statement his team's working with the Attorney General's office to defend the state against any federal moves to arbitrarily withhold funds that support education, emergency relief, and people on Medicaid. The president issued a threat yesterday morning on social media. Students at more Northwest universities have suddenly had their student visas revoked. Northwest Public Broadcasting's Lauren Patterson has more.
At least 4 students at the University of Idaho and 3 students at Washington State University are just some from all across the country having their student visas revoked by the Trump administration. School officials say universities have not been notified by federal officials, and they haven't been given a reason why. Kate Hellman is WSU's Director of International Student and Scholar Services.
I've been in this position for almost 6 years. I've been in the field of international education for 20. I've never seen something like this.
She says there's a database university officials can use to check the visa status of their students, and they're checking each day so they can provide information and support to students. Students are being told to reach out to their universities as the situation develops. I'm Lauren Patterson, reporting.
This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance, working to help protect small businesses and the owners that run them, offering customizable coverages to salons, accounting firms, tradespeople, and more. Learn more at progressivecommercial.com.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. Washington State standing up to a president. Is that always a good idea? That's one of the questions raised by this week's news, and that's what we do. We discuss the news, we debate the news on this show, so thank you for tuning in. We are on YouTube. If you want to watch the show, we'll live stream it there. And by we, I mean Seattle Times editorial writer and columnist. I have another title to add here, Claudia Rowe. New book.
Oh, yes.
It's called Wards of the State. Tell me about it.
It's called Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care.
Yeah. It's coming out
next month,
yeah.
May 20th.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Washington Policy Center senior researcher, Paul Guppy. Welcome back, Paul.
Great to be here. Thanks.
It's good to have you. Host, writer, producer, Angela Poe Russell. Thank you for coming again.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you all here. So this week, our state's chief of public schools said no. He will not sign a letter from the U.S. Department of Education. The department sent this letter to K-12 schools nationwide, telling them to certify that they comply with federal civil rights laws and they do not use, quote, illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Otherwise, they lose federal funding. So our state's school superintendent, Chris Rakedahl, called this letter a, quote, attack against the rights of states to have civil rights frameworks that exceed the federal minimum. He said states have the authority to adopt their own learning standards, curriculum, and instruction materials. And he said diversity, equity, and inclusion are core values in Washington's education system. Quote, we will not suppress or cede that to the federal government. Education reporter Claudia Rowe, what do you think of Chris Rakedahl's stance?
I think that he is absolutely right to push back. He's not alone. Washington's one of at least 6 states that have publicly pushed back on this very, very performative executive order, which does not really have the force of law. It's just sort of a statement. California, Minnesota, Vermont, New York, have also made similar statements.
Not the force of law, Claudia, but the force of federal funding?
We've seen that the president can be quite punitive. So certainly there's risk along those lines. Washington gets about $3 billion from the federal government per biennium. So it's about 7% of the total K-12 budget. That's not insignificant money. I think that our governor, Bob Ferguson, is well experienced in pushing back against the Trump administration, and we have reserves in the state budget which might need to be tapped if we experience the president's sort of punitive tendencies.
We'll talk about that state budget in a moment, as a matter of fact, on this week's show. Angela, you're shaking your head a little.
I just wonder how long this can go on. So I agree with Claudia that I think it's the right move for right now. But I think we need to have a long-term game, and I think we need to get one fast because we have 4 years of this. And how long? So in other words, what I'm saying is I support the programs. I mean, when I looked at like some of the programs that would be
You mean
impacted,
DEI programs?
DEI, I mean, it is baked in to the Seattle to a lot of our school districts. I mean, it would take a lot to unravel them. So short term, I think it'd be really difficult to do. I think he's right to push back, but we've got many more years of this. So I think we need to have a plan for how we still serve students, and maybe you go a little undercover. When I say undercover, you put different names on things.
Right, that's happening.
I mean, so here's a question, just broadening it out for a moment. So we have a lot of nonprofits, and these nonprofits sometimes get funding through the federal government. I know of at least one that has lost a lot of money because they're like, we're not backing down from DEI. When do you say we need to maybe call it something else or do some,
Universities already said that they were going to do that when Supreme Court said affirmative action is off, right? They said that about a year ago, maybe a little bit more.
2023.
Right. And universities have essentially said, well, we're looking for other ways to sort of get at that student group, demonstrations of hardship, whatever. They're doing that already, right? Like sort of obfuscating a little bit.
I love that word.
It's a good one. So, yes.
Is that the same as cheating?
No, absolutely not.
It's just obfuscating. That's all.
The children are listening, by the way.
Anyway, I interrupted your point. Go ahead.
Oh, I just think that I get your point, Angela, about how damaging this could potentially be. I also think it's really, really important to stand up to bullies. And this guy's all about people obeying in advance, about people acting out of fear, and about forcing people to curry favor. And I just have a personal disgust with that.
Well, you and I agree on that point. I'm just thinking this is going to be a long, we got several more years of this, and how long do we hold on? But you wait.
Well,
please.
I cheer you guys on fighting Donald Trump, and you can do that all day long. But what bothers me is when these controversies are drawn into public education, because kids always get caught in the middle. So if I were in Reichdahl's shoes, I would go along with the other 44 states and say, sure, fine, I'll sign the piece of paper. Federal funds always come with conditions. And that's the bargain that you make with the federal government when you take their money. Politics in Washington, D.C. changes, and then you have to go with or you should, I think. But here's the bottom line, is that why seek more controversy in public education when I think it should be focused on academics, learning, building confidence with parents, and just letting national politics flow by. It's always coming and going. But as a top education official in our state, I think you should focus on the quality of education in the schools. But I'll close with an upbeat point and agree with you guys regarding the independence of Washington to run its own affairs.
That's where, yes, because
Exactly.
which is it? Or do we want to turn it over to the states, or do you want the federal government to run it? Which is it?
Also, it's performative because most of this federal money comes through congressional formulas.
Yeah, but it's about $7 billion out of a K-12
About $3 billion.
Oh, I meant
7% of the budget.
7%. You're right. Thanks. Yeah, so 7% out of a budget that's like almost $50 billion for K-12 education. So the point about reserves or transitioning to a point where the state is more independent, and that's my whole point about strings attached. When you take federal money, whether you're a nonprofit or whatever, it's not free money. It's always going to come with political conditions.
But Paul, are you suggesting that the state sign the letter and then just do nothing? Sign the letter and change don't say DEI, sign the letter and stop what? I mean, what about support for kids with disabilities or multilingual learners? Like, what's a DEI program?
Well, I think the state should
vague.
accommodate all of those goals. DEI itself is divisive and controversial, I would say. We've had as
inclusion and equity are divisive and controversial.
Let me finish my point. We've had it. The Governor Inslee put this in place 4 or 5 years ago, and I just look at it from an empirical policy analyst point of view. If something is successful and it's been in place for 4 or 5 years, it will generally garner 80-90% support, and it will not be controversial anymore. One indicator that a policy idea isn't running into trouble or not working is if it continues to spark debate and controversy.
What programs are we talking about that are controversial or that we
race-based policies, DEI or woke policies or culture wars, whatever label you want to put on it? What I'm trying to say is a focus on academics in the schools is the best way to build confidence with the public, and the state should move towards independent financing.
You're talking about, Bill, specific programs. bias training for teachers. I think that's very important, and that would probably fall under something like diversity, equity, inclusion. We put money into educating teachers about this.
But what would be bias? For those who don't know,
difference.
what would bias training be? What's an example of what we're talking about?
I think making I haven't been privy to what they're exposed to, but I do know bias training starts first with making you aware of bias, giving you stories, examples of how, I mean, if you've never taken the bias test that was created by
implicit
bias.
Yeah.
I would just love to share a quick anecdote. I mean, I used to volunteer in my daughter's school, and I saw where there were certain kids. I'll just say it was a Black and Asian kid who had a lot of behavior issues. And I just thought, why is this happening? And the next thing you know, my daughter was having a ton of issues. Why are they not performing well in this environment? And sure enough, this kid goes to a school out of the country and is thriving and doing really well. I sent my daughter to a private all-girls school. All of a sudden, the behavior issues went away. Sometimes it's not the kid, it's the environment they are in. And I do think, regardless of what strings are attached, that the schools have an obligation to make sure that you're treating every kid, equally and giving the kindness, the attention, and that would proper training. I think that's important.
Everybody's in favor of that. The question is dealing with a
DEI.
political change in Washington, D.C., which is thousands of miles away, and that our state superintendent creating what I think is an unnecessary controversy in dealing with that, instead of focusing on the issues that you're talking about inside our state system. And to me, the bottom line is maintaining public confidence and trust in public education so that families will continue to stay engaged.
Here's where I think we agree on one point. I think we agree on this part.
Oh, that's good.
Is I do think sometimes, okay, I hate talking sides like, liberals or Democrats. I hate that. But I'll just say that there are some people, when they see something isn't working, they just want to dig in on something. Like the whole defund the police. Like, this branding is not working. Can we change the branding? DEI is not, for whatever reason, it's been perverted. It's been, people have misinterpreted what it means.
Weaponized.
Weaponized. That's a great word. Can we rebrand it just for the sake of being strategic?
Well, that's why I was asking. What are we saying? That the school superintendent should sign the letter and just rebrand it and obfuscate, or sign the letter and do nothing else, or sign the letter and change what programming?
But I think the practical effect is that's going to happen anyway. Because, Reichdahl's going to do what he wants anyway, and he believes in DEI, and he's going to continue to push it. My point
would you fight to the end?
My point is the practical effect of how it puts off parents and families who don't like it in the system, and then they look for
what part puts them off, though. What part of all of it?
DEI and wokeness is controversial.
But what part of it? Like what?
I'm just talking about market effect. There are millions of parents who are involved in the public education system, and many of them are leaving the system and seeking alternatives. And as to build public confidence in public education, I think should be the focus of what Reichdahl's doing.
One place where I agree with you is a dire need for more attention to academic outcomes and academic standards in Washington State public schools. Totally with
Angela
you there.
raised her hand as well.
Oh, yes. I just was amening. Yeah.
Yes,
it's radio, so you have to say yes.
Yeah. So 100% yes. I actually have some stuff coming out about that exact thing in this Sunday's paper. So I agree with you there. I don't think these have to be mutually exclusive.
Right.
I also don't know the DEI, again, the vague use of DEI, where that intersects with curriculum. Because the education department, for example, has said that schools cannot shame or assign intrinsic guilt based on the actions of students' presumed ancestors or relatives in other areas of the world. And there's so much about that sentence I don't understand. But just one thing is what shaming means. Does teaching about history, does teaching about Pearl Harbor, does teaching about the violent displacement or enslaving of people, is that shaming somebody? I really don't know what the government, the Trump administration
means. That's just the
by
truth. That's just accuracy about history. A lot of which
become
is
controversial, though, I can tell you.
I would say follow the facts. And, you have to describe history accurately. Otherwise, we're not going to learn from it. And that has to do with individuals and societies.
What about if we're teaching about the history of colonization and the effects of that today? I mean, that's a perfect example of what not everybody thinks that's just teaching facts. It's just slippery.
I think you should describe, there are two steps, since I'm huge on learning and academics. There are two steps. First, and I was just tutoring a student yesterday on history, by the way. Step one is understand what happened to the extent that the facts are available. And number two, draw an assessment about it, and you can discuss that openly. Whatever your opinion or conclusion about things that happened in the past is, go ahead and express it. But back it up with information about that particular era, the Civil War, the founding of the country, empires spreading across the world. First, understand historical processes, and then form an opinion.
Okay. I was thinking about specific
Last word,
programs.
Angela.
Okay,
Yeah.
affinity groups
Yes.
that could be impacted. I will say this, the people, speaking of academic outcomes, the parents I know have taken their kids out. It's frustration because they've been told, well, we can't advance your kid to this next level because it wouldn't be fair to the other kids. And I'm like, wait a minute. So that means my kid can't move forward? That makes no sense. I think most people agree that that's not a great thing.
Exactly.
And look, I hate the pressure of the last word here, but I'll just say if I were Rick I would say short term, you need to resist, but long term, we need to have a backup plan. And that backup plan might look like some rebranding.
Okay. Well, I could relieve that pressure if the education reporter wants the last word.
I actually agree with a lot of what you said. I think Chris Reichdahl likes this fight. And so I think he welcomes this fight. I think he is pretty deeply steeped in ideology. I think that permeates a lot of the way he runs, the way he does his job in other education areas. So I think he welcomes this fight and really has a taste for it. I kind of admire the willingness to stand up, but I also think that can overshadow really what I think that office and that job should be focusing on, which is better academic outcomes. So I agree with you there, Paul.
Great point. And if Reichdahl were running for Senate or governor, I would be all for that. But when students get drawn into it, it has an impact on them too.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about the stakes, the financial stakes for the state budget a little bit later in the show. Before we take a break, though, since we're talking education, the Trump administration has revoked visas for some students at the UW, at Seattle U, WSU, Gonzaga. UW says that University of Washington says 5 students and 4 post-grad trainees had their visas revoked with no explanation, according to the school. Some students wonder if they're next, particularly if they have criticized Israel's war in Gaza. UW alum Tarek Yosef went to some of the pro-Palestinian protests last year.
Like, if I think about the people that I knew that were at a lot of the protests, a lot of them are citizens, but their parents aren't. There's now that extra worry of, like, how far exactly are they going to go?
I'll stick with the education reporter for now. Claudia, what do you think of the Trump administration's actions?
Punitive and short-sighted. I think that there's a reason that many universities in this country have encouraged and welcomed foreign students. One is financial. For instance,
they pay full freight.
Right. They pay more than an in-state kid. So in a down budget cycle, that's going to be important to UW, and many other universities. But speaking more broadly, there is a reason that, other than money, that universities encouraged foreign students, and it was sort of a diplomatic policy. It was federal policy maybe 50 years ago, specifically to sort of open America and American values to young people from other parts of the world, to come here, to forge bonds, to sort of understand the American way of life, and hopefully to stay here and use their brain power, innovation, ideas to our benefit. So
that's diversity, Paul, by the way. Sorry.
I'm all for it.
Okay.
So, I mean, there was a real, this didn't just happen by accident, and it wasn't only about money. It was also sort of a tool for soft diplomacy, and I think that's out the window now. And that's a loss.
I just want to know, what is this really about? Is this really about, we want to punish you because, you caused trouble on campus, you were, anti-Semitic in your comments? I mean, is that really what it's about?
No, it's about intimidation. It's about saying we are watching and we're going to, hurt you. It's about creating a sense of fear pervasive everywhere in this country so that everybody obeys in advance.
Yeah. Because I've been struck by, I've had a few people say this in light of, I just think it's awful to do this. I mean, what's confusing and upsetting is that UW is like these kids, these students were given no reason. Like weren't given a reason. So that's disturbing to have the rug pulled out from under you. But it's hard for me to even say this, but this is what some people have said. Well, at least now someone with a 3.5 GPA can get into their local university. Like that. And so I was like, what is driving? And more than one person has said this. And so it kind of made me dig into this a little bit. And when I look at our, if you look at the elite universities that now we have record numbers of applications for. I mean, Duke had a record like 55,000 applications this year for just a handful of spots. And at some of these, NYU, 42% international, Northeastern, almost half international students. So if you can, almost like the border, if we create fear and deport people, now people aren't showing up at the border. So now you create fear amongst international students that, am I going to be able to get back in if I leave on vacation? If I come here, am I going to get kicked out all of a sudden? Will they think twice before coming here? And then is this a way of like, it's that whole like word I've been hearing tossed around is nativism and bring America back and America first. And I just wonder if there's some of that kind of bubbling underneath this.
Okay, let me straighten this whole thing out for you.
Sure.
First of all, foreign exchange and cultural exchange are good. I went to school overseas myself. I've lived on a student visa in other countries, so that system is great. It does contribute to understanding.
Totally.
I was doing it during the Cold War, so there was even more international tension than now. So that's positive. It creates lifetime experiences and even friendships between people from different countries. That's a good thing. Second of all, I think you're right that we don't know why these visas have been pulled, but I have a suspicion that the people to whom it happened, they probably have a good idea as to what activities that they engaged in that led to that. The bottom line is that having a student visa, you're a guest in this country, and no one has a right to come to the United States and go to university. So when you're on a guest visa or student visa in another country, I think you're obligated to follow
Watch
the rules.
what you say?
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah. You don't have the same freedom of speech in a foreign country that you would as an American.
No,
let me finish my point.
Okay.
All
right, I'm going to sit on
And I also make a distinction between public universities and private universities.
Okay.
If Seattle University or Gonzaga wants to have 50% foreign students, that's their business model. Go ahead. They're a private institution. For public schools, the public universities in Washington State, the 5 universities, turn away thousands of applicants, high school graduates in the state. And I think there is an obligation for the public system to be more available to residents of this state.
University of Washington, at the last check, has 10,000 international students.
Out of like 50,000, right? Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, if you make that argument, when you talk about public universities, federal dollars, what's our obligation? Yes. But I just want to go back. Claudia and I were kind of eyeing each other on that point. I mean, the First Amendment, if you're on U.S. soil, it's my understanding that it applies to you whether you're a guest here. I mean, it may not be nice of you to criticize the country, but legally it applies.
Well, I should clarify. What I meant is like breaking rules on campus, engage in damaging anti-Semitic activity. It's not just freedom of speech. And I'm, as you know, I'm a free speech absolutist completely for everybody in the world, as a matter of fact, because it's a innate human right. It's not based on countries. However, if you're a guest in another country and you engage in criminal or destructive behavior or vandalism or whatever it might be, that's why I say that the students whose visas were lost, I suspect they know what activity they engaged in that led to getting the attention of the State Department.
Well, the graduate student at Tufts who was literally taken, like abducted off the street, as far as we know, she wrote an op-ed.
No, it was apparently she was engaged in camping and demonstrations and other things. I saw that too. And the State Department said specifically, it's not because of the op-ed. It was because of other activity that she was involved in.
I haven't heard that.
Let's pause because we're talking about an entire week on this program, Week in Review. So let's take a break and come back with more news discussion. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned to KUOW 94.9, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:30. 50 degrees in South Seattle. Partly sunny is the forecast for this afternoon.
On this week's On the Media, the CEO of Blue Sky, a competitor of Meta and X, shares her ideas of how to billionaire-proof the internet.
Zuckerberg has built a digital empire, and we've helped him build that with our data and our time. And I want people to realize that we can build our own digital spaces. We can take that back.
Don't miss this week's On the Media from WNYC.
Sunday at 6 p.m. on 94.9 KUOW.
Support for KUOW comes from Third Place Books. Journalist Malcolm Harris discusses his new book, What's Left? 3 Paths Through the Planetary Crisis. Sunday, April 27th at 7 p.m. More information at thirdplacebooks.com. And from EcoSpark Heat Pumps, helping remove fossil fuels from the home with heat pumps from Mitsubishi Electric Heating and Air Conditioning, ducted and ductless heating and cooling solutions for any home. EcoSpark participates in Seattle's Clean Heat program to help people transition to heat pumps. More at ecosparkheatpumps.com.
This is KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. You may be watching the show on YouTube. I'm sure you're listening to the show, and you're listening to host, writer, producer Angela Poe Russell, Washington Policy Center's Paul Guppy, and from the Seattle Times, editorial writer, columnist. Are you an education reporter still? Or
well, I report for my columns and my editorials.
Yes, right.
So, yeah.
Hi, Claudia Rowe.
Hi.
And we're talking about the news of the week. And I want to talk now, I want to go to Olympia, where this week more than 100 Washington state workers, well, I don't know if all of them got their knuckles involved, but some of them banged on the governor's office door. No cuts, no furloughs, tax the rich. They are angry because Governor Ferguson has dismissed the idea of a large wealth tax, and he's proposed furloughs for state workers. Paul, how should the state balance its books?
Well, furloughs is a good idea. I've already complimented it online, so I have to stick with the record. He's proposing, I think it's 12 furlough days for the year, but state
over 2 years.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Which is pretty minor. I compliment Ferguson for being creative and kind of thinking outside the normal box as to how to take care of the budget. But also, union workers or state workers, most of whom are unionized, are already set to get a pay raise, an increase in benefits through the current collective bargaining agreement. That's going to add about $4 billion to the next budget cycle. And the Democrats in the legislature have said they're on track to fully fund that. So you have to see that in the context of the raises that state workers are getting already.
Okay, so question. So his proposal, the governor's proposal to do these furlough days, it saves a bunch of money, but it doesn't fill the entire gap.
Not at all.
And so I feel like what the question we have here is we have to make cuts. If those cuts, I would have to imagine a lot of these cuts would impact probably the most vulnerable. So the question is, what do we do? I would almost, if I were in that position, gather some of the leaders at some of the industries in the state and say, here's what we're dealing with. If we cut this, we're going to impact these vulnerable populations. What would you propose? Like, what would your ideas be? Because it's like, yes, we're going to all feel some pain, but on whose back? I don't want to drive business away. I definitely don't want to drive business away.
I want to hear what you think, Claudia.
Yes.
But since you brought up business, Amazon, Costco, Microsoft, Nordstrom, T-Mobile, Weyerhaeuser, and the Seattle Mariners are on record opposing new business-related taxes, and they're warning of severe economic consequences.
Right. So the last one, I mean, since nobody here will ever talk about an income tax, the next
I
one,
will.
I'll talk against it.
Right.
What?
So the one
that
that everyone is sort of, well, the last big thing in the room is raising the cap on property taxes, right? Voters are going to be, I'll keep it clean.
Okay.
They're going to be livid at that, I think. And Ferguson won't even really talk about a payroll tax, like a statewide version of the Seattle Jumpstart tax.
Yeah.
Right.
He hasn't said he would veto it, but he
just won't talk about it, not publicly, at least.
Unlike the wealth tax, which he did say we could try. He just says, though, this wealth tax idea, taxing stocks and bonds and artworks, assets over $50 million, it would affect like 4,000 people. He says it's untested, it's hard to implement, it's going to get challenged in court, we can't count on it. But if you want to do a tiny version of the wealth tax just to float it and see if it holds up, you could do that.
Here's what I want, Paul. So I heard you kind of chime in and say, I'm against the income. Oh, go ahead, please.
Well, no, I'm jumping ahead on you here. Income tax we can talk about. I'm just trying to stay on topic.
Oh,
But go ahead.
I'm going to the topic.
I
I'm
see.
actually, yeah, so let me finish.
Okay.
The question is, this budget gap, how would you fill it then? So I would love to know the answer to that question. How would you close this budget gap?
I love this question. So we talk about
This
cuts.
is what he does for a living.
Exactly. We talk about cuts, but in the world of government, okay, which is kind of the la-la land of financing, okay, these are not actual physical cuts. These are reductions in planned increases.
Spending more money than we were planning on spending
Exactly.
more.
You've heard this story before.
Yes.
That's the context of public financing. So a budget and state revenue is rising. So the Republicans did put together a budget that increases state spending by 8% over 2 years, raising it up to $75.5 billion and funds all current government services and all collective bargaining contracts with that 8% increase, and has no actual physical cuts anywhere. All discussion of cuts has to do with automatic built-in increases, and all the legislature has to do is to reconsider those priorities. So that's how you get to a balanced budget. But the Democrats, by the way, voted that down. So they say that we still have a budget crisis because they rejected a budget that
it's a growing state. There's more services they want to provide.
Yeah, so their projection is that the government should spend even more than the 8% increase, and that's the policy difference between the two parties.
So the head of the state's largest employee union called the governor rat-fink Robbie Ferguson and said, this is the Washington Federation of State Employees, said that he's anti-worker and vowed to make him a one-term governor.
Well, I would argue, and I'm not even on their side, but my advice would be careful about calling Ferguson names, especially in his first legislative session, because going up against a governor has a lot of power, and he's their natural ally. And maybe he could say that to Ferguson in private, but creating a public division between a Democrat governor and public sector unions, I think, is a bad strategy for their side.
Yeah, who did you say said that?
It's Mike Yastrzemski.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know him.
I do know him. I mean, as a source.
Yeah. He's the head of the largest public sector union.
The last governor reached a collective bargaining agreement with state workers. And so the current governor is saying, well, in his opinion, we can't afford that. You have to furlough state workers for 2 years in a row, so a total of 24 furlough days.
So the smart move, again, who am I to give a labor leader advice? But they had a very cozy relationship with Inslee. They love this collective bargaining agreement that was negotiated before the election, and now they're simply trying to get funding for it. What Ferguson is proposing is really some tweaks. And maybe this all comes down to be symbolic posturing as to who's going to have the lead in this relationship going forward. But again, if I were the union, I would take 95% of the deal and maintain a good relationship with Ferguson.
Yeah. No, I think that's smart. You know, a lot of what's happened in Olympia this session, it's just a reminder that we have to be so diligent about who we choose to represent. We focus on these presidential politics, but so much happens here that impacts our daily lives, and the same for union reps. I mean, I think I was telling you all earlier about some stuff that's been said from the head of the Seattle Police Guild. I mean, who you elect as your representative can really impact your bottom line in a major way.
Yes.
One more item before we leave this topic. This comes against the backdrop of a greater possibility now for a recession, especially in Washington State, where we export a lot. We're very trade dependent, and we all know about President Trump's tariffs. And then there's the Trump administration's threatening to withhold federal funding from states that allow sanctuary cities. There are cuts to Head Start, public health, school funding, medical research, cultural grants to artists and writers and speakers, national forests, parks, and, as Claudia pointed out to me, libraries, which you did not appreciate.
I do not appreciate that. What I saw earlier this week was the possibility of a $4 million cut to Washington State libraries, which is a third of their budget. And, maybe, Seattle Public Library can weather the storm, but little tiny rural libraries, as I understand it, could be seriously affected. And that's a real concern.
So, Paul, are these reasons to raise taxes
Yeah,
in
that's what I was
Washington
going to
State?
say. Like, it seems like the state should be prepared to intervene.
The federal government, why should, in fact, you could argue, why should, especially if you're a state's, devolve it to the states type of person, why should the federal government be paying these bills anyway?
Exactly.
Raise the money in Washington State. So you want higher taxes, Paul, right?
I have nothing to say because you made my point right there.
Oh.
No, I'll add to it. Yeah, this all goes to just the awareness that, getting money from Uncle Sugar in Washington, D.C. comes with conditions. When political conditions in the Capitol change, it trickles down and affects us. That's what we're seeing. Libraries should be funded, clearly. $4 million is pocket change in Olympia.
Yes.
And they could easily fully fund this. And going back to your point about who we elect and how important that is, my question is, why aren't libraries first on the list to be funded, along with schools, public safety, essential things first, and just take that off the table and say, okay, rural libraries, they have their funding. Now let's move on to some other budget item.
Well, we cannot settle here what is the top priority for the state of Washington.
It should be among the top, 10 or 20.
Okay, let me ask this before we take a break. Do any of you own a Tesla, first of all?
No.
Okay. No. If you did, imagine if you will, you come to the parking lot and find your car's been graffitied and it says fascist pig. Would you feel hated for your Tesla purchase, and would you want that graffiti to be a hate crime? I ask because in Washington State, a hate crime is an offense motivated in whole or in part by a victim's perceived race, color, religion, ancestry, or gender identity or expression. And this week, Republican State Senator Phil Fortunato proposed adding 2 categories: economic choice and political affiliation. And as examples, Fortunato pointed to vandalism and threats against Tesla owners. Democratic Senator Moncadingra Kirkland voted against that amendment, and according to the news site My Northwest, she said, quote, making economic choices or owning a Tesla is not a protected class, to which Fortunato responded that that's up to the legislature. Quote, it is a protected class if we say it's a protected class. Who's right?
Fortunato's right in terms of this principle. And that is what he's pointing out is the can of worms that's opened when you create something called hate crimes. And you alluded to it earlier when you say that the crime is defined on motivation or the perception of the other person. That becomes very hard to prove that in court, to have an objective standard. And also hate crimes is added punishment on top of the underlying crime.
The idea being you're targeting more than the person who's being victimized, but because they're a member of a certain group, you're sending a message and threatening.
Please finish.
That's it.
Sure. My point is the problem of definitions, that once you get away from kind of objective standards of equal justice under law and open up new categories of protected classes, and that's what Senator Fortunato was pointing out. It's like, okay, if the legislature can create a protected class, then I have an idea. How about Tesla owners?
Just admit he was trying to get President Trump's attention. He was
trying to get cabinet appointment.
I mean, this is so ridiculous. And, we have to send a message that targeting people because of something they can't control related to their race, their gender, their identity is not going to be acceptable. And I think having hate crimes on the books sends that message.
But the problem is proving it, because it really becomes thought crime. What was in the person's mind when they victimized someone else? And also, if you have a criminal and a victim of the same race, that offense is treated differently than if you have the same offense, the same crime, but the people involved are of different races. So it just creates incredible complication when you're also trying to say that the justice is blind, it's an objective system, it's fair for everyone. It just creates that contradiction, and that's what Fortunato was pointing out.
I think we can move on. This is a non-issue. I mean,
why a non-issue?
Tesla as a protected class or not? Come on. I mean, come on.
So your answer is come on.
My answer is come on.
Okay. All right. Do we settle it? Okay, we've discussed. Let's leave Olympia and take another break and come back and discuss more of what happened this week and what we all think of it, because our listeners want to know. Stay tuned to Week in Review.
KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham. It's just about 12:45.
I'm Scott Greenstone. On the latest episode of Sound Politics, Washington State is getting fewer visitors from the north. We'll hear from real live Canadians about how they're navigating the frosty relationship between the two countries. Listen to Sound Politics on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for KUOW comes from the immigration group at Ryan Swanson Law, lawyers helping individuals and businesses with non-immigrant visas, permanent residence, and citizenship. More information at ryanswansonlaw.com. And from Eco Design and Maintenance, family-owned and specializing in start-to-finish exterior design using materials and methods that help to reduce environmental impact. From landscapes to hardscaping, outdoor spaces designed to be functional and long-lasting. More at eco-seattle.com.
Oh, Angela, that's such an interesting thing to say. Oh, by the way, this is KUOW's Week in Review, and put those headphones back on. Even when we take a break, we don't really take a break from discussion. Right. So, let's see. By the way, that was Angela Poe Russell. She wears many hats.
Yes, I do. And I love wearing the hat of being a panelist on the show today.
I'm so glad. Paul Guppy wears the senior researcher hat at the Washington Policy Center.
Yep.
And Claudia Rowe not only wears a Seattle Times editorial writer hat, but also an author hat because she's got a book coming out next month called
Couple of Hats. That is not the name of the book.
No, the book is not called Couple of Hats, although I would read that too if you wrote it. It's called Wards of the State, The Long Shadow of American Foster Care. So we are discussing what happened this week. I'm Bill Radke, by the way. You can watch the show on YouTube if you like. The Seattle City Council is thinking about regulating clubs that are open past 2 a.m. These after-hour clubs would have to have 2 trained security officers, video surveillance, and a safety plan, or they're fined $5,000. The head of the Soto business area, Aaron Goodman, said there's too much gun violence at these clubs.
These businesses often hide behind the guise of legitimacy, leaving patrons unaware that they are entering spaces where safety measures are non-existent.
Meanwhile, the Seattle Police Department has declared one Rainier Beach hookah lounge to be a chronic nuisance property. This is a very rare designation, but 2 people were killed there last week. There have been at least 6 shootings outside of the bar since June. The owner has been charged, though I don't believe convicted, of keeping liquor at the lounge without a license. That's a gross misdemeanor. And this, that's called the Capri Bar and Restaurant, has to fix its issues, respond to the police chief, and he says voluntarily correct this nuisance to the police chief's satisfaction, or the city could shut it down, could fine, could penalize it. Paul, are you okay with all that enforcement?
Yeah, you knew this in advance. You're putting me on the spot here because of my ardent defense of my sort of mild libertarian view of protecting private property, of not having the police interfering in your business every 2 seconds, and basically pushing back against the power of the state or the government, particularly police power, which is the strongest that they have. So that's where I would come down, that the burden really is on the police and the city to really show that these business owners are responsible for some kind of crime or illegal activity.
Not just their patrons?
Exactly. And this maybe has more to do with individual responsibility. Now, if you can show that the business is some kind of front and that what they're really doing is criminal activity inside the club or whatever.
And sometimes it's outside the club.
Well, and see, that's the thing. So maintaining public safety is the responsibility of the government, not the business owner. Now, the smart thing is for business owners to cooperate with the police, put up more cameras voluntarily. But if it comes down to a dispute, I'm entirely on the side of protecting individual private citizen rights and property rights and the ability to run your own business, and that it's the duty of the police and the city to maintain public safety, even in a hot spot like this one.
I'm. So you want to go first?
It's a tough one, huh?
Yeah, okay. I don't know. Again.
Wait a minute. Your response to the last topic was, "Come on."
Yeah, I'm almost there with this one. Like, come on. This business is supposedly at the very least, forgetting about what's been going on outside the business, but at the very least, the story I read said that there is some kind of record of the bartender pouring, serving drinks, and getting paid by patrons after hours, right? After 2.
Which other bars can't do.
Cannot do. And it's a huge deal if even, if staff at a bar are literally sitting there having a beer after their shift and it's 2:15, it's a huge deal. It's a huge problem. And to have sort of like a special carve out for this kind of business that seems like more of a haven for criminal activity.
What's the carve out? That it's a private club?
It's a private club.
Okay.
And the fact that it's, normally you wouldn't have the whole indoor smoking, but this is allowed. And on top of it, but in other restaurants or let's say bars can't serve alcohol after a certain time, they can.
Yeah, the rules are different.
And I just have such a problem with this. It's so I can be a little less, like I'm kind of disagreeing with you a little bit.
Sure.
In that, yes, I get you're a private club, but we do have community standards. And after a certain time, it's shut down, especially if you've been causing problems. So there are other places that have to abide by certain rules. And I just don't like the idea of a carve out when, I understand I understand some of the cultural traditions behind it, but I'm not even sure it's those who come from that culture that are the ones using it.
Exactly.
So for me, we've been struggling. I was looking at news articles from 15 years ago. We were dealing with this issue. Can we have some courage and deal with it?
When you say culture, I think these type of hookah lounges are typically associated with East African immigrants and children of immigrants. Right.
Yeah, that's what I'm speaking of. Yes.
Right, but 2 African Americans were killed there within, 2 weeks ago. So
it's a safety issue. So, maybe I'll bring a 3-way agreement here together is that you make a good point that the legal aspect is kind of a deception, is that you say that you're a private club, but you're actually functioning just like a regular business and you should be regulated that way. So putting up a sign that says, hey, this is a private club, the police can't come in, it should not be a shield for criminal activity.
I think we agree.
Wow, what is happening?
Wow, that's beautiful.
Miracles do happen.
Okay. Then we need to get off this topic fast because there is just consensus.
Let's get back to controversy.
Yes. Are our listeners getting the irony from that?
I hope so.
Okay. Here's another item. State officials, well, let's talk about this. REI says it made a mistake when it endorsed, this will get back to President Trump. REI says that it made a mistake when it endorsed the president's choice for Interior Secretary. It turns out Doug Burgum is into environmental deregulation and drilling on public lands. And the endorsement, which came in the form of a letter from a bunch of outdoor recreation companies, hacked off plenty of REI members. Didn't like that REI signed it. Their employee union called it shocking and part of a trend of REI, quote, abandoning the values that make our co-op special. And the new CEO, Mary Beth Lawton, says that REI's previous CEO is the one who signed this letter so that the company could, quote, have a seat at the table and continue our outdoor recreation advocacy.
Let me be clear. Signing that letter was a mistake. The actions that the administration has taken on public lands are completely at odds with the long-standing values of REI.
Are we going to have consensus on this or disagreement?
Maybe, well, go ahead.
Well, I just had a question. The new Interior Secretary, I don't know much about this person's background. Was there an actual on-the-record history of what they were for or against when the endorsement happened?
That's a fair question. I don't know how much was the governor of North Dakota, and I don't think I just assumed that President Trump's choice for Interior Secretary, governor of North Dakota, was going to be drill, baby, drill.
And then there's that. I think here's where we may be able to agree. I feel like I don't know who REI is anymore. It just feels like it lost its way. And I think it needs to get back on track. It's I think part of what made REI great is it felt part of the community. You could go and rent your things for the camping trip. You could go and have the local excursion. And I feel like when it even cut that, you took away what made it different than everybody else. And so, I'm glad if this is the direction the company wants to go, that the new CEO is making the values clear. And yeah, I think that's a step in the right direction for at least
let us know who you are. These days, consumers want to know who they're doing business with. I mean, we've seen it with people's response to Costco and Target. You know, for better or for worse, they want to know who they're doing business with.
Super interesting. And I wonder if, so Bill, you mentioned, I think REI customers pushed back against this.
I don't know how many.
But
Some
that's an
numbers.
important point that Angela is making. And I agree with you. I think REI's identity was such a great and special thing, a unique, truly unique kind of business. And it has felt like that's been more than diluted.
Yeah, before I want to hear from you, Paul. It's occurring to me that not all listeners. I mean, I should disclose I've been an REI member for like 40 years or something.
Oh,
It's this co-op. It's Recreational Equipment Incorporated. It's a co-op. It's been around for before me. You know,
60 years.
Yeah.
Does it feel different to you?
Well, maybe not the store experience, but you brought up classes, and REI doesn't even do those classes anymore.
And travel, right? Didn't they sort of run a lot of travel tours for a while?
Yes.
No more of that.
I don't think they do that. And so, you know, the idea that they want to sell stuff, it reminds me, I do want to hear from you, Paul, but since you got me going, I just want to say that it reminds me, fair or unfair, I'm curious if you think it's fair or unfair. I think a lot of Seattleites and people from this region have the sense that Boeing used to mean something and they sold out. REI, I'm not putting in the Boeing category, but we're talking about the change and the backlash. And then you could even lump that into, you know, what people think are big, ugly apartment buildings, and right, and Amazon this, and so I think that we could. There's a whole reservoir of feeling that people have about, and REI is a symbol for a lot of people. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, so you're referring to, I'm nostalgic about this too, funky Seattle back in the day when REI was in the creaky warehouse on 12th Avenue.
Right.
So that's all true. But so I agree with that. I do think that REI does have, because it's a co-op, because of its history, that they should hang on to that culture and focus on their customer base, which has now grown enormously. And they have created, by the way, kind of a welcoming entry into the outdoor world and backcountry hiking and things like that, which is intimidating to a lot of people. But when you get that kind of encouragement, support, along with the right equipment, and you can walk into an REI store and ask any question, what kind of sleeping pad should I have?
Yeah.
What kind of tent is good?
They're great.
What national park should I hike in? They are great for that.
Yes.
And that's the kind of culture they should stick to. Regarding the, of course, I'm fascinated by political maneuvering, right? So is it for a company that endorses a cabinet member and then regrets it, is it a mistake? Is it more of a mistake to admit that you made a mistake or to just do what the president did, which is to say, or the chairman, and say, we shouldn't have signed this letter and we're out? I'm not sure where that stands. But again, since I can't resist giving other people political advice, for a business, I would say be careful about endorsing someone to begin with.
Yeah.
They're trying to get leverage or entree into the Trump administration. There are ways to do that. You have your consultant or lobbyist, but actually endorsing a cabinet member and then regretting it later, that may have been the wrong choice that they made.
Okay, I would regret it later if I didn't hear what made you smile, because we have a minute left in the show, and I always want to know, did anything make you smile this week?
Yeah, I can jump in. There's an art gallery, Wanawari, in the Central District.
Yes.
And they have this community feeding program. So you can just come by on a certain day and get a free meal. And it made me smile to see a mom and two of her kids coming out with plates of food. And, you know, you don't have to cook that night, or if you don't have the money to, it's great. It's a wonderful program. Wanawari in the Central District.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, what always makes me smile is the beautiful area we live in, and record low tides are scheduled for the middle of this month and then later this month, as well towards the end of the month. Yeah, these minus tides are fantastic, especially when they occur like after sundown, and you go out with a flashlight and you can explore the tide pools. And apparently the Seattle Aquarium is arranging for volunteer marine biologists to be available to answer people's questions.
Groovy.
Spring in Seattle is magical, as everyone knows, and it's definitely here. I mean, we're in a slow spring. You've been very kind to mention my book a couple times, but I will have to say that it was a thrilling experience to come home this week and see this unexpected huge box in front of my house, and it was books, and they look amazing, and it was truly a thrill, and I restrained myself from doing the thing where people open their box of books, and they post that video on Facebook. I did not do that, but I thought it.
And you thought, I did that. You did a good thing because you're shedding light on an important topic. So,
Words of the state.
Words of the state.
We got to go. We're over time. This is Claudia Rowe from the Seattle Times, editorial writer, columnist there. Paul Guppy, senior researcher, Washington Policy Center. Host, writer, producer, Angela Poe Russell. You've made me smile. Thank you for coming. See you soon, right?
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks. Good
Bill,
one.
I'm Bill Radke, producer Kevin Kniestat. We'll see you next week.
It's 1 o'clock, BBC NewsHour coming up. Among the stories you'll hear today on NewsHour, a pioneering study into how babies' brains develop. KUOW FM Seattle, KUOW Tumwater, KQOW Bellingham.
Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Marshall. Another push